The morning sky over Katira Prime was a mix of purple and gold as Elisa walked through the forests near her home. She had always loved this time of day when the world seemed to hold its breath between night and day. The trees around her were ancient, their bark silver and smooth like the skin of water. She moved between them with the grace of someone who had walked these paths her entire life. Behind her, Ember and Ash followed obediently, their scaled bodies moving silently through the undergrowth. Elisa was different from other elves in her village. While they spent their time weaving cloth and tending crops, she explored the wild places. While they whispered prayers to the old gods in their sacred temples, she studied the plants and animals and learned their secrets. Her mother had passed when she was very young, and her father had raised her alone in a small cottage at the edge of the settlement. He had been a scholar, a keeper of ancient knowledge, and he had filled her mind with stories of the world beyond what could be seen. When her father died 3 years ago, many thought Elisa would finally settle into a normal life. Instead, she had become even more independent, even more driven to explore and discover. The village elders disapproved of her ways. They said a woman of her station should marry and raise children and forget her foolish dreams of adventure. Elisa had listened politely to their words and then ignored them completely. The 2 dragons at her side were the reason the village feared her most. She had discovered their eggs in a cave deep within the Forbidden Mountains, a place no elf had ventured in over 200 years. The eggs had been enormous, each one the size of her head, and they were cold to the touch, appearing completely lifeless. Most elves would have left them alone, believing them cursed or dangerous. But Elisa had always been drawn to things others rejected. She had carried both eggs back to her cottage wrapped in cloth, and kept them warm by the fire for weeks. When the first crack appeared in Ember's egg, she had sat up all night watching as the creature inside worked to break free. Ember had emerged bloody and exhausted, barely able to move. She had fed him drops of milk and honey, warming him with her own body heat. 3 days later, Ash had hatched in much the same way. Raising them had been difficult. The village had wanted to kill them when they were young, calling them monsters and demons. Only Elisa's determination and the few friends she had made over the years had protected them. She had learned by trial and error what dragons needed, feeding them meat she hunted herself, teaching them to trust her, showing them that not all living things were threats to be destroyed. Now, 5 years later, both dragons were fully grown. Ember stood taller than any horse, his copper scales gleaming in the morning light. Ash was slightly larger, with his gray scales that seemed to shift between colors depending on how the sun hit them. Both had developed personalities as distinct as any person. Ember was playful and curious, always investigating new things. Ash was calm and thoughtful, watching everything carefully before acting. As they walked, Elisa picked berries from the bushes and placed them in the leather pouch at her side. These berries were used by the village healers for medicines, and she often gathered them to trade for things she needed. But mostly she walked simply to be alone with her thoughts and her dragons. Out here in the wild places, she felt more at peace than she ever did in the village. That was when the sound came. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before. A terrible rushing noise like wind but also like thunder, and then a sound of metal screaming as something tore through the sky above her. Elisa looked up in alarm. The dragons sensed her fear and moved closer, pressing against her on both sides. The object came down somewhere to the south, beyond the next ridge of mountains. There was a tremendous crash, the earth itself seeming to shake with the impact. A moment later, a column of smoke and fire rose into the sky, climbing higher and higher until it towered above the trees. Birds scattered from every direction, fleeing in panic from the terrible sound and trembling ground. Elisa's first instinct was to run home and tell the elders what she had seen. But curiosity had always been her strongest trait, stronger even than caution. She looked at Ember and Ash, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in their eyes. Neither dragon had ever shown fear before, but they were clearly unsettled by this strange occurrence. "Whatever that is, it fell not far from here," Elisa said aloud. "We should see what it is. Maybe someone needs help." She knew it was probably foolish. The village elders taught that the sky was home to demons and angry spirits. They said that nothing good came from the heavens, only punishment and destruction. But Elisa had never been good at listening to warnings. She had lived her entire life doing things that were supposed to be impossible. Why should she stop now? She began walking toward the ridge, moving quickly but carefully. The dragons followed, their large bodies surprisingly graceful as they navigated the forest. As they climbed higher, the smell of burning metal and chemicals became stronger. The smoke was thicker now, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. When they reached the top of the ridge, Elisa gasped. Below them, in a wide valley, lay something that should not exist. It was enormous, made of metal that gleamed silver and blue even through the scorching and scorch marks. It had a shape that reminded her of a great bird, but it was clearly artificial. Clearly made by intelligent beings. Pieces of it were broken off, scattered across the ground like toys. Flames still burned in several places, and thick smoke poured from what looked like openings in its side. This was real. This was not a dream or a vision. Elisa stepped forward, moving down the slope toward the strange vessel. Ember and Ash descended with her, their eyes wide, their bodies tense. Neither dragon had ever seen anything like this either. In all the years Elisa had raised them, they had lived in a world of forests and mountains and simple natural things. This metal giant was something from a different existence altogether. As they got closer, Elisa could see that one side of the vessel had a large opening, almost like a door, hanging crooked on what appeared to be mechanical hinges. She could hear sounds coming from inside, some kind of mechanical hissing and popping, and underneath those sounds, something else, something like the cry of a wounded animal, something like pain. Someone was alive in there. Someone needed help. Elisa took a deep breath and moved toward the opening. Ember and Ash hesitated for just a moment, then followed her into the darkness of the strange metal vessel. The interior of the ship was darkness filled with strange sights. Emergency lights flickered at intervals, casting the corridors in an eerie red glow that made everything look like it was bathed in blood. Elisa moved slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air smelled wrong here, thick with chemical scents she could not identify, and something else, something sweet and metallic that made her head feel light. Water dripped from overhead, and sparks occasionally shot from damaged panels in the walls. Ember made a small whimpering sound, a noise Elisa had never heard him make before. She reached back and touched his snout reassuringly. Both dragons had to crouch low to fit their large bodies through the corridors designed for human-sized beings. Ash's tail accidentally struck against the wall, creating a loud clang of metal on metal that echoed through the empty passages. The sound of pain Elisa had heard from outside grew louder as they moved deeper into the vessel. She followed it, turning down different corridors, climbing over debris, stepping over scorched and twisted metal. Some of the damage was obviously from the crash, but some of it seemed to come from fire or explosions that had occurred afterward. The ship told a story of violence and destruction written in its broken components. Then she found him. He was lying in what appeared to be some kind of control room, his body wedged beneath a large piece of equipment that had fallen during the crash. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, and his right leg was crushed at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled around him, and Elisa could see that he had been lying here for quite some time, suffering in silence. The man's eyes opened when he heard the dragons enter the room. For a moment, nothing happened. He simply stared at Elisa, at her pointed ears and silver skin, at her flowing hair that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. Then his gaze moved to the dragons behind her, and his eyes widened in what looked like shock or perhaps disbelief. "This is a hallucination," the man said, his voice hoarse and weak. "The pain medication they gave me before the crash. I am hallucinating. This is not real." "I am real," Elisa said simply. "Your leg is hurt. We need to move this metal thing off of you." The man stared at her for a moment longer, and she could see the exact moment when consciousness began to slip away from him. His eyes unfocused and his body went slack. He had lost consciousness, possibly from pain, possibly from blood loss. Elisa immediately turned her attention to the fallen equipment trapping his leg. The metal piece was enormous and heavy, far too much for her alone to move. She looked at her dragons and pointed at the metal. Ash seemed to understand immediately. The large gray dragon moved forward and positioned himself carefully, his powerful legs bracing against the floor. Elisa pushed while Ash pulled, straining with effort. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound of stressed metal, the equipment began to move. Elisa worked as fast as she could to pull the injured man out from underneath the heavy piece of machinery. His leg was in terrible condition, crushed and broken and bleeding profusely. She tore strips from her own clothing and wrapped them tightly around the wound to stop the bleeding. She did not know if this man could even survive an injury this severe, but she had to try. She and Ember managed to get him into a position where she could carry him. He was heavier than she expected, But with one of his arms around her shoulder and Ember supporting his weight from the other side, they were able to move. The journey back through the corridors of the damaged ship seemed to take forever. Every time she thought they were close to the exit, another collapsed section of floor or blocked passage would force them to change direction. By the time they finally emerged into daylight, the man had regained consciousness again. He was delirious, saying things that made no sense, speaking in a language Alyssa did not understand mixed with words she could comprehend. She carried him away from the ship and laid him carefully on a patch of soft grass in the shade of one of the tall trees that grew in the valley. His breathing was shallow, and his skin had taken on a pale, waxy appearance. Alyssa knew enough about wounds to understand that he was in great danger. Without proper treatment, without medicine beyond what she could make from forest plants, he might not survive the night, but she had to try. She gathered what supplies she had in her traveling bag and began working, cleaning the wound as best she could with water from a stream nearby, applying poultices of healing herbs that grew in the forest. Ember and Ash stayed close by, watching their companion work with what seemed like concern. Both dragons seemed somehow aware that this injured creature was important, that Alyssa cared about keeping him alive. They did not wander or play as they normally did. Instead, they lay down nearby, their eyes alert and watchful. As the sun began to set, Alyssa sat beside the injured man and tried to decide what to do next. She could not leave him here alone. The valley was dangerous at night, filled with predators and creatures that hunted in the darkness. She had never seen one attack a dragon, but she did not want to risk it. The most sensible thing would be to return to the village and tell the elders what she had found. They could send help or at least provide shelter for this stranger. But the man had shown fear when he thought she was a hallucination. What would happen when he woke in a village full of elves? Would he be terrified? Would he try to hurt them? Alyssa knew that her people sometimes reacted with violence when they were afraid. She had seen it happen before with other refugees and strangers who had wandered into their territory. She decided that she would wait until morning, until she was sure the man would survive the night. Then she would take him to the village, but she would go prepared to defend him if necessary. If her people wanted to harm this stranger from the sky, they would have to go through her and her dragons first. As darkness fell completely, Alyssa made a small fire to keep warm and to scare away any predators that might be drawn to the blood smell from the man's wound. She sat between her dragons, watching over the unconscious stranger, and waited for dawn to come. Morning came slowly, as if the world itself was reluctant to face the new day. Alyssa had not slept. She had spent the entire night watching over the injured man, checking his breathing, refreshing the wet cloth she kept on his forehead, and making sure his wounds did not bleed too heavily. As the first hints of dawn touched the sky, she felt a desperate weariness pull at her body, but she forced herself to stay alert. The man was still alive. That was something to be grateful for. His fever had broken during the night, and his breathing had become more regular. She had managed to get him to drink some water mixed with herbs that would help prevent infection and reduce pain. Whether these remedies would actually work remained to be seen, but they were all she had to offer. As the sun began to rise, Alyssa faced a decision. The man needed real shelter and better care than she could provide in the forest. He needed clean water, warmth, and rest. The village was several hours away on foot, and moving him would cause him pain. But leaving him here alone was even more dangerous. A predator could find him, or his fever could return and worsen without anyone to care for him. She began to prepare him for the journey. She fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and cloth torn from her own clothes and the man's tattered uniform. Ember helped her lift him carefully onto the stretcher. The man groaned in pain but did not wake. His body was small compared to what Alyssa was used to, smaller and more fragile than elves, though she had nothing else to compare him to. Everything about him seemed different, from his light-colored skin that had burned slightly from the sun, to the strange devices attached to his clothing, to the tattoo on his neck that she could not read or understand. The journey to the village was difficult. Ash pulled the stretcher while Alyssa guided him, and Ember walked alongside, ready to catch it if it fell or tipped. They moved as quickly as they could while still being careful not to jostle the injured man too much. By the time the buildings of the village came into view, the sun was high overhead and Alyssa was exhausted. The first person to see them was Lydia, one of the village healers and one of the few elves who had supported Alyssa's unusual way of life. Lydia was gathering water at the well when she spotted the strange procession. Her eyes widened in shock when she recognized who was coming, and even more so when she realized what they were carrying. "Alyssa, what have you done?" Lydia asked, rushing forward. "Found him in the crashed thing from the sky," Alyssa explained briefly. "He was hurt. We brought him here." The other villagers began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Whispers spread quickly through the community as they saw the strange creature being carried on the stretcher. Some of the elders made angry sounds and took threatening steps forward. Others looked curious but wary. Children peeked from behind their parents, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. The village leader, an ancient elf named Theron, pushed through the crowd. His silver hair was long and thin, pulled back with jeweled clasps that showed his high status. His face was lined with age and what looked like anger. "Alyssa, you have brought an outsider to our sacred village without permission. This is a grave violation of our laws. What do you have to say for yourself?" "He was dying," Alyssa said simply. "Would you have had me leave him there to perish alone?" The elders debated among themselves, speaking in rapid Elvish that Alyssa mostly ignored. She knew that some would want the stranger killed or cast out immediately. Others might be curious enough to let him stay a while. Lydia stepped forward and said something that seemed to sway the discussion. She gestured to the man's wound and to the skill with which it had been tended. She pointed out that whoever this stranger was, he clearly came from somewhere with technology and knowledge beyond their world. What could they learn from him if he lived? Finally, Theron raised his hand for silence. "The stranger can remain in the healing house while his wounds mend. Alyssa, you will be responsible for his care and for any harm he causes to our people. If he proves to be a threat, the consequences will be severe." Alyssa agreed quickly before the elders could change their minds. With Lydia's help, she carried the man to the healing house, a large building made of pale stone with windows that let in plenty of light. Lydia had worked as a healer for 40 years and had seen many injuries, but even she seemed impressed by the careful way Alyssa had treated the man's wound. "I do not know your name," Lydia said to the injured man as they laid him on a soft bed of woven cloth stuffed with dried herbs. She was speaking to him as if he might hear her even though he remained unconscious. "He is from the Sky People," Alyssa said. "I do not know what they call themselves." "We will find out when he wakes," Lydia replied. "His leg will need careful treatment. The bone is badly broken. Even if he recovers, he may never walk properly again." They worked through the day, cleaning and rebandaging his wound, making poultices of herbs and paste to prevent infection, preparing medicines to reduce his fever if it returned. Lydia showed Alyssa techniques she had never learned before, ways of setting broken bones and treating severe injuries. It became clear that healing this man would require all the skill and knowledge both of them possessed. As evening fell, Alyssa sat beside his bed, watching his face in the lamplight. He was less frightening when he slept. His expression was peaceful, almost childlike. She wondered who he was, where he came from, what his purpose had been in the sky. Did he have a family somewhere? People who were looking for him? Did they know his ship had crashed? Would they come searching for him? Outside, the village was alive with excitement and fear and argument. The arrival of this stranger had disrupted everything. Some elves saw opportunity, others saw danger. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos stood Alyssa, a woman who had always been different, now responsible for keeping a being from another world alive and somehow helping her own people understand that the universe was larger and stranger than they had ever imagined. The man remained unconscious for 3 days. During this time, Alyssa barely left his side. She slept in a chair beside his bed, waking at the slightest sound to check on him, to give him water mixed with healing herbs, to refresh the bandages on his injured leg. Lydia came several times each day to help with his care, and gradually the infection that had started to develop began to recede. His fever broke on the second night, and by the morning of the third day his breathing had become stronger and more regular. It was around midday when his eyes finally opened. They were a pale blue color, nothing like the dark green eyes of the elves. For a long moment he simply lay there staring at the ceiling, seeming to orient himself to his surroundings. Then slowly his eyes moved to the side, and he saw Alyssa sitting in the chair beside his bed. The man's reaction was immediate. His entire body tensed and he tried to sit up, but the pain in his leg stopped him with a gasp. His hand moved to a device on his chest that looked damaged, as if he was reaching for something that was no longer there. "Easy," Alyssa said gently, the way she spoke to the dragons when they were frightened. You are safe. Your leg is badly hurt. Do not move too much. The man stared at her as if trying to determine whether she was real or another fever dream. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. When he finally spoke, his words were strange and difficult to understand, but Alyssa could make out the meaning. Water. Please. Water. Alyssa moved quickly, bringing him a cup of cool water with herbs mixed in. She helped him drink, supporting his head gently so he would not spill it down his chest. When he finished, he lay back against the pillows, breathing heavily as if even that small effort had exhausted him. My name is Marcus, he said slowly, speaking carefully so that Alyssa could understand him better. I am chief engineer of the exploration vessel Horizon. Where am I? What happened to my ship? And who are you? Your ship fell from the sky, Alyssa explained. The crash damaged it very badly. You were trapped underneath some metal. I brought you here to the village. I am Alyssa. The healer is Lydia's ship, Marcus repeated, concern flooding his face. The crew? Were there any survivors? Did you find anyone else? I found only you, Alyssa said. I am sorry. Marcus closed his eyes, and Alyssa could see pain cross his features, though it seemed to come more from his mind than from his body. She understood enough about loss to recognize grief when she saw it. She did not know what to say to comfort him, so she simply sat in silence and let him process what she had told him. Over the following weeks, Marcus recovered slowly. His leg was badly damaged, and even with Lydia's careful care and Alyssa's constant attention, he would never fully regain its use. He would walk again eventually, but with a permanent limp. The realization of this seemed to trouble him greatly at first, but gradually he seemed to accept it. As his body healed, Marcus's mind began to function more clearly. He asked many questions about where he was, about the elves, about the planet itself. Alyssa answered what she could, bringing him books from the village library, introducing him to Lydia and other elves who were curious about him. The village elders remained suspicious, but as weeks passed and Marcus showed no signs of being dangerous, they gradually allowed more people to visit him. Ember and Ash came to visit several times. The dragons were curious about this strange creature, and Marcus was fascinated by them in return. He asked Alyssa endless questions about how she had found them, how they had grown so large, what they ate, how intelligent they were. His scientific mind seemed unable to rest when faced with something so outside his previous experience. One day, about 6 weeks after his arrival, Marcus asked Alyssa to help him walk outside. It took a long time and the pain was clearly severe, but he managed to stand and take a few steps with her, supporting much of his weight. They walked slowly through the village, and Marcus stared at everything with the intensity of someone seeing a new world for the first time. The architecture of your buildings is remarkable, he said. You have achieved a high level of sophistication without industrialization. The way the stone is fitted together, the water systems, the organization of your settlements, this is exceptional engineering. Alyssa, who had never thought of her people's buildings as engineered at all, found his perspective interesting. The elves had simply built their homes the way they had always built them, using methods passed down through countless generations. But Marcus saw in them the application of principles and understanding. You should see what we found at the crash site, Alyssa said. Your ship has many strange things. There is metal and glass and other materials we have never seen before. Marcus's eyes lit up with interest. Can we go there? I need to see what survived the crash. There might be salvageable technology, materials that could be useful. Is it far? It is half a day's walk, Alyssa said. But your leg is not ready for such a journey. Then we go when it is ready, Marcus said with determination. I need to see what is left of my ship. I need to understand what happened. And I need to figure out how to call for help if that is still possible. Alyssa agreed, though she felt some hesitation. She wondered what would happen if Marcus's people did come to retrieve him. Would they be grateful or angry? Would they see the village and the elves as a threat? Would they take Marcus away and never return? The thought of him leaving troubled her more than she wanted to admit, which surprised her. She had known this man for only a few months, and yet somehow he had become important to her, had become woven into the fabric of her daily life. But for now, Marcus remained. He continued to heal, to explore the village carefully, to ask questions and observe everything around him with the intensity of a scholar. And Elisa continued to care for him, watching as he learned her language more completely and began to understand the way of life her people had built over countless centuries. 3 months after the crash, Marcus was finally strong enough to make the journey back to the site where Elisa had found him. They traveled slowly, with Ember and Ash accompanying them. The dragons seemed to understand that Marcus was important to Elisa and that this journey was significant. They moved at a pace that would not aggravate his injured leg, though Elisa could see the pain in his face with every step. When they finally reached the valley where the ship lay, Marcus stopped and stared at it for a long time without speaking. The vessel looked even more broken now than when Elisa had first found it. Nature was beginning to reclaim it, with vines growing across the hull and birds nesting in the damaged sections. What had been a representation of human achievement was becoming just another feature of the landscape. The stabilization systems must have finally failed, Marcus said quietly. My ship is dying. All that knowledge, all that technology, all of that is going to rust away to nothing in this atmosphere. Perhaps that is not entirely bad, Elisa said. Everything that comes from nature returns to nature eventually. Your ship will become part of this world. Marcus looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. You have a different way of seeing things than humans do. That is not a criticism. It is an observation. I think we could learn much from each other. They spent the day carefully exploring what remained of the ship. Much of the interior was inaccessible, but they managed to access the main storage compartments and some of the lower-level systems. Marcus salvaged what he could, carefully removing intact components and placing them in packs that Elisa and the dragons helped to carry. He explained each item to her as he worked, telling her what it was designed to do, how humans had created it, what purpose it served. There is a communication device in the bridge, Marcus said as they worked. If I can get to it and if it still has power, I might be able to send a distress signal. It will take time for a rescue ship to arrive, but at least my people will know I survived. Elisa felt a strange mixture of emotions at this news. She was glad he would be able to contact his people. Leaving Marcus abandoned here would have been wrong, but the thought of rescue ships coming, of people from the stars descending upon her world, of everything changing, filled her with both excitement and fear. They attempted to reach the bridge, but the damage was too severe. The corridors had collapsed in places, and the air inside was stale and filled with fumes from the degrading systems. Marcus tried several times to force his way through, but his injured leg simply was not strong enough to navigate the twisted metal and sharp debris. I will come back, he said finally when they had to abandon the attempt. I will be stronger in another month. We can try again then. As they made their way back to the village, Marcus was quieter than usual. Elisa could sense that he was thinking deeply about something, wrestling with some internal conflict. When they stopped to rest for the night, she finally asked him what was troubling him. I have been thinking about what will happen when my people come, Marcus said. They will want to study this world. They will want to know everything about your people, your technology, your capabilities, and they will want to take me home. I have thought about it constantly since the crash, what my responsibility is to them, what I owe my family, what I owe my career. And what do you think? Elisa asked carefully. I think everything is more complicated than I thought it would be, Marcus said. I came to explore new worlds and make discoveries that would advance human knowledge and capability. I have succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. I have found a civilization of beings who have achieved remarkable things without any of the technologies we consider essential. I have found creatures that should not exist by any biological model we understand. And I have found someone who saved my life at great personal risk. Someone who has taught me that there are different ways of being advanced in this universe. Elisa did not speak, sensing that Marcus needed to continue. When my people come, Marcus said, I do not want them to see your world and your people as a resource to be exploited. I do not want them to take technology or knowledge from you without giving something in return. I do not want them to change everything about the way you live. I want to find a way for our peoples to meet as equals, to learn from each other without one side dominating the other. That is a worthy dream, Elisa said. But will your people accept it? Will your leaders agree to such terms? I do not know, Marcus admitted. But I can try. I can use everything I have learned here to convince them. I can tell them about the sophistication of your engineering. I can show them the dragons and prove that there are forms of intelligence we have never encountered before. I can make them understand that what we have here is unique and precious and worth protecting." They sat together in silence as the fire burned down to embers. Ember and Ash slept nearby, their large bodies casting long shadows in the fading light. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and Alyssa thought about the vast distances Marcus had traveled to get here, about the other worlds he had visited, about how large the universe truly was. "When my people come, will you help them understand our world?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Alyssa said. "If you think it will help ensure that we are treated fairly, I will do whatever I can." Marcus nodded, seeming to draw strength from her words. In the months to come, he grew stronger. His legs still pained him, but he was able to move with increasing confidence. He and Elisa spent time studying the technology salvaged from the ship together. He taught her the scientific principles that governed how the devices worked, and she taught him about the plants and animals of her world, the intricate systems of balance that kept the ecosystem functioning. The village elders gradually came to accept that Marcus was not a threat. Theron himself asked to speak with him one day, wanting to understand more about the world beyond their own. Other elves became curious about his knowledge. Young elves especially wanted to learn about human history and human ways of thinking. And then one day a message came. The communication device Marcus had managed to repair using parts from the salvaged equipment sent out a signal that was picked up by a passing merchant vessel. A rescue ship was coming. It would arrive within 3 months. Alyssa stood with Marcus and her dragons on a hill overlooking the village when they received this news. The future was about to change. Everything they had built in these months of quiet cooperation and mutual discovery was about to be transformed by contact with the larger galaxy. It was terrifying and exciting in equal measure, and whatever came next, Alyssa knew that her small world would never be quite the same again.